Millions are infected, hundreds of thousands have died, economies are floating into recession, healthcare facilities are stretched thin, lifestyle and behavioral patterns have greatly been altered. A vivid description of a COVID-19 ravaged world. Governments of countries are implementing strategies towards ending the pandemic with policies and guidelines to curb the contagion. The recent extension of the partial lockdown in Nigeria is an indication of relentless efforts by the federal government to turn the tide, just as the global community collaborates on approaches towards defeating the common enemy, coronavirus. This is our focus on Panorama today from the Lagos Network Center. I am Dotson Okmiemi. And 16 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been reported in Nigeria by the NCDC. 74 in Lagos, 33 in Katsina, 19 in Oyo, 17 in Kano, 13 in Edo, 10 in Zamfara, 8 in Ogun, 8 in Gombe, 8 in Borno, 7 in Bauchi, 7 in Kwara, 4 in the FCT, 3 in Kaduna, 3 in Enugu, and 2 in Rivers State. Figures of confirmed cases in the country as at 18th May stands at 6,175, with 1,644 patients discharged and 191 deaths recorded. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says the President's directive on easing of lockdown will continue for another 2 weeks with all the stipulated guidelines in place. Kenneth Nanim reports that the extension directive by the Presidential Task Force was approved by President Muhammadu Buhari.
On COVID-19 believes the gradual easing of lockdown has achieved remarkable progress, but not without some challenges. PTF Chairman Boss Mustafa explained that the federal government introduced various measures to reduce bank interest rates through CBN intervention facilities to stimulate the economy.
Based on the recommendations of the Presidential Task Force, Mr. President has approved the measures, exemptions, advisories, and scopes of entities allowed to reopen under Phase 1 of the eased lockdown shall be maintained across the Federation for another 2 weeks, effective from today, 18th May, until the 1st of June 2020. The 2 weeks extension of Phase 1 of the eased restriction is also to enable other segments of the economy prepare adequately for compliance with the guidelines preparatory to reopening in the coming weeks. For the Presidential Task Force, we share your pains, but our future is in the hands of every Nigerian, and future decisions would depend greatly on our compliance.
How do we restart our economies safely? How do we move from the narrative of a lockdown to a narrative of a safe reopening so that people can go back to their livelihoods while still staying safe as possible from this virus? How do we do that in the farms? How do we do that in the markets? How do we do that in the schools? How do we do that in transport? How do we do that in aviation? And really, this has to be our focus in the next few weeks.
He noted that the increase in COVID-19 laboratory network testing, increased bed spaces and training of more health workers to tackle the pandemic are some of the successes achieved in the fight against the pandemic. The existing lockdown in Kano State, he added, will be maintained for another 2 weeks.
We do not want Kano figures to escalate and be in competition with the figures in Lagos. And the only way you can do that is to reduce and interrupt the processes of community transmission that was hitherto in Kano.
The PTF says the federal government is adequately collaborating with the state governments to ensure strict observance of interstate movement restriction to further curtail community transmission of the coronavirus. Though the level of awareness on the pandemic across the country is high, the PTF said it will continue to interface with local authorities to create more awareness on the observance of prescribed guidelines.
On stigmatization, this has remained a concern. In the March poll, 81% said they are willing to work with people who recover from COVID-19. However, that figure has now dropped to 78% in the current poll.
Go for regular medical checkups. And as much as possible, don't find excuses for your symptoms. See your doctor and let the doctor determine what is going wrong at a given point in time.
The task force also announced that all approved allowances, especially for security agencies, will be paid after due processes. While the nationwide dusk to dawn curfew sustains for another 2 weeks, Nigerians are advised to take responsibility to contain the virus, as no vaccine is expected till the end of 2021 and the virus is not likely to end soon. Kenneth Nanim, NTA News.
Meanwhile, the partial easing of the lockdown by 2 weeks comes with renewed plans to tackle COVID-19. These measures were contained in an address by the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Mayor Ogidi, x-rays the address.
Like a test run, Nigeria eased its lockdown for 2 weeks on the 4th of May 2020. And life gradually emerged with stimulus packages to revive the ailing economy by the federal government, such as reduction of interest rates from 9% to 5% for all CBN intervention facilities, 50 billion naira facilities to households and businesses adversely impacted by COVID-19 through NISAL Microfinance Bank, 100 billion naira facility to pharmaceutical and health sector companies to retool their businesses, 1 trillion naira facility to agri and manufacturing companies to expand and set up new factories, and suspension of repayment of all state government loans for 1 year to give states enough financing room to pay salaries, among others. And the first phase of the test run, as it were, ended, and the PTF chair, Boss Mustafa, and his team is here to unveil the next line of action and to answer questions.
For the Presidential Task Force, we share your pains, but our future is in the hands of every Nigerian.
For the PTF, it is 2 weeks of mixed bag. That is, the level of compliance with guidelines low, but efforts to curtail the spread high. On the sunny side, there was increase in the number of laboratories in the COVID-19 network from 15 to 26. Additional 15,558 tests were conducted, increase in the number of trained personnel to 11,409 health workers, procurement and distribution of additional personal protective equipment and ventilators across the country. However, the infection prevention and control activities identified 9 high-burden local government areas in the Federation, reporting high number of cases and accounting for 51% of the total number of infections in the country. And with the briefing received from President Buhari, the status quo on the ease of lockdown still remains for another 2 weeks to still observe the behavior in the era of the new normal. This means all measures, exemptions, advisories, and scope of entities allowed to reopen under Phase 1 of the eased lockdown shall be maintained across the Federation for another 2 weeks, effective from 12 midnight, 18th May 2020 to 1st June 2020. Maintain the existing lockdown in Kano State for additional 2 weeks. Imposition of precision lockdown in states or in metropolitan high-burden local government areas that are reporting a rapidly increasing number of cases when the need arises. This would be complemented with the provision of palliatives and continued re-evaluation of the impact of the intervention and aggressive scale-up of efforts to ensure that communities are informed, engaged, and participating in the response with enhanced public awareness in high-risk states. It is a new era that comes with new traditions, and since nobody knows when COVID-19 will be over because science moves at its own pace, the PTF advises state governors to align their state-specific measures with the guidelines issued by the Presidential Task Force. Hunger has no sympathy for anyone, so farming activities must go on. Therefore, PTF reminds the security personnel to consider farmers during their enforcement exercises and see the period with human face. When the finishing line is in sight, the runner puts in more efforts, and that is the task before all Nigerians at this time. Mie Ogidi, NTA News.
In the meantime, President Muhammadu Buhari has made a strong representation to the state governors to work more closely with the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 towards engendering better harmony in the task of containing the prevailing health crisis. This was at a virtual meeting with the members of the Nigerian Governors Forum on the state of the nation. State House correspondent Adamu Sambu has the report.
The virtual interactive session between President Muhammadu Buhari and governors of the Federation was the first amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. President Buhari presided over the meeting from the Executive Council chambers in the State House. With him were the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, his new Chief of Staff, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, Ministers of Justice, Finance, Budget and National Planning, as well as the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Members of the Nigeria Governors Forum, led by the Governor of Ekiti State, Kayode Fayemi, joined the online meeting from their respective states, deliberating on the fight against coronavirus, especially the next steps in national response to the pandemic. President Buhari harped on the need for the governors to collaborate more effectively with the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 towards containing the health challenge. COVID-19, he emphasized, is beyond technology, power, and resources, saying even countries that had all those are recording highest casualties around the world. He said everyone needs not only to be very careful, but continue to educate and persuade the people to accept the reality of the situation and do all that is necessary to stay safe. The meeting, held behind closed doors and lasted about 1 hour, also discussed, amongst others, economic and security issues. The governors commended the president on the leadership and direction he has given the country in combating COVID-19. They used the forum to congratulate the Nigerian leader for appointing Ibrahim Gambari as his new chief of staff, describing the appointee as a round peg in a round hole. From the State House, Adamu Sambo, NTA News.
International cooperation is necessary for the relegation of coronavirus, while citizens of the world await a vaccine as a stopgap. Medical efforts and restructured guidelines on human interactions are in force. Here to talk about the current trend is Professor Chidi Njemanze, a chemical and research professor of neuroscience and academics of the International Academy of Astronomers, the UNESCO body for space research. He is also the chairman, International Institute of Advanced Research Training, Owerri. Welcome to Panorama, Prof.
Thank you very much.
What is your reaction to the extension of the partial lockdown?
Well, as I've said in many press releases, the concept of the lockdown is a wrong concept to deal with a disease of this magnitude for the Nigerian environment, because the lockdown was meant to enforce the social distancing. However, that is adapted to a place like in Europe or America, where you have 2 people in a family with about 2 rooms. In Nigeria, you have the average family size of 6, and then you have only 1 room in major cities. So what you are doing with the lockdown is clustering people together and not actually achieving the so-called social distancing. And if you add our peculiar condition of power scarcity, whereby you might have 1 television in the neighborhood which has a generator, you are actually clustering not only just that family and even their neighbors in 1 small space. So it is an erroneous concept, and we must do away with this. This is an international catastrophe, what the politicians have done with this COVID-19 pandemic, because this is total incompetence. The cases have risen 4 times since after the lockdown, and it's still rising. So it's not working. We have faced this situation before with Ebola. We dealt with it, and it was a purely medically run affair. And we dealt with it, and it never became a pandemic or even an epidemic in Nigeria. So I think we really have to have a total rethinking of this and allow the medical doctors to run this, because we deal with this on a daily basis. The politicians are doing so poorly with this whole pandemic.
And there are scary projections that more people could die from the virus across the world. The WHO is saying that on the African continent, for example, about 60 million people are said to die from the virus. And in the same breath, countries are relaxing the lockdown and stay-at-home order. Is this calamity really going to play out?
Not really. This, as it has been, is a very fake concept. It's based on very fake science. These projections are very wrong. They have no basis whatsoever. Now, the virus you're talking about, the coronavirus, is relatively very mild, causes a very mild disease, for one thing. 2, it is an aerosol spread infection. When you say that, that means in very, very small aerosols that it spreads. That's the main issue, and in droplets. So if that is the case, humidity, if you go into an environment like we have in Nigeria, where the humidity varies from 40% to about 70%, in any high humidity environment, it limits the spread of any aerosol infection. So even in the open space, the virus does not transmit. It is only in very close contact you will have a transmission. So the so-called model for Africa, where many 60 million people will die, is a totally erroneous concept. And I frown at what we are observing now. So with some of the Amagiris being infected with this virus and being sent across the states. So that means cause for one to start suspecting some sabotage of the entire scenario. We will not have that scenario play out in Nigeria, I can tell you for sure.
And we keep talking about flattening the curve. Is Nigeria anywhere close to its peak?
That is also another erroneous concept. Let me give you an example. As I have also engaged my colleagues in the United States, and we talked about this. A state like Georgia ended the lockdown. What did they have? They had a 12% drop in the infection. So what does that mean? That means that the concept itself is a wrong approach. And there is not, the flattening of the curve is not achieved by the lockdown. What normally happens is that it takes 21 days for the body to come up with the antibodies to fight any infection. So what normally happens is that the 21 days, as it elapses, people get the immunity, and once they get the immunity to the virus, the disease stops spreading from one person to the other, because the immune system is limited. That is what is happening in New York. That's what is happening in Florida. That's what's happening across the United States. It has nothing to do with the lockdown. The lockdown, if it has done anything, it has even made matters worse. It is costing the whole world $20 trillion. This is an absolute incompetence and economic catastrophe, and I think we should end that in Nigeria. We need a situation whereby we can advise the people, if you're in close contact, if you're in a vehicle, if you're in a crowded space, please use a face mask. That will help. If you have open spaces like in a bank or in a church, please install a humidifier, because when we have the air conditioning system, air conditioning dehumidifies an environment. So you need an additional ultrasonic humidifier to raise the ambient humidity. Once the ambient humidity is high, up to 50%, you will not have a transmission of that virus within that space. You use the science and the physical constraints of the virus in order to deal with it. But what we are seeing is basically political measures that are ineffective and totally incompetent.
Now, Prof, let's look at remedies available, like the Madagascar remedy. Should African countries look inwards?
Yes, African countries must look inwards. We already have recipes that can work. There are natural recipes, even the one people can get. During the Ebola crisis, you remember we talked so much about bitter kola. The same ingredients still work. However, even beyond that, we have been talking since 2016 with our group at the International Institute of Advanced Research and Training and our colleagues at the Obasanjo Space Center. We have been talking about mass eradication of both malaria, and now we saw that the artemisinin and the quinine combination could also work to reduce the viral load in COVID-19. What does this mean? So if we were to give the same malarial treatment which we give today, which yesterday President Trump even declared he takes the drug, as most of the frontline workers do. If we were to give the anti-malarial treatment, which we take very often in this country, for those who can tolerate the combinations, if we were to give that artemisinin and quinine combinations for those who tolerate it, at the same time, that's the most important aspect. Not people taking at different times. If we were to do that 3 days at the go, at the same time of the year, 3 times a year, we will wipe out both the malaria and reduce the viral load for those who have it of COVID. What does that mean? When the viral load is low of the COVID coronavirus in blood, what it will mean, it will give the immune system the space to produce antibodies. These antibodies will defend the person against the disease. It's as good as any very good vaccine. And for that matter, they are waiting for a vaccine. But I will tell you now, conceptually, it will be impossible to have one vaccine that works for all the strains. Because during this pandemic, the virus itself, the coronavirus, has mutated 13 times. That means you have 13 different strains in China of the same virus. So what is happening is that if you had a vaccine against one strain, it wouldn't work for the others. So what needs to be done, we have to look beyond a vaccine. And we have to look at our natural strengths.
All right, Prof. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Chidi Injemaze, for your time. Thank you also for your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're still watching NTA Panorama from the Lagos Network Center. We'll take a break. We will be back shortly.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
Thanks for staying with us. Nigeria football